and Charles. And these heroes who were the guards standing around, they had nothing to do, so they were really perfect for drawing. But they were also heroes. The colors in the silk screen was done with just mylar laid in. It was completely nothing to do with the street drawings. Here's another street drawing, and that is extremely typical. You can see the structures as they remain that became well known in photographs. I think that went backwards. And it went on, the fire. I find myself walking around making up arguments in my head, but when I try to write them down, they dissolve in a flood of questions and misgivings. I value these questions, these misgivings, more than my analysis of the situation. Charles wrote 4 different, rather lengthy poems, and one of them is published in his most recent book called All the Whiskey in Heaven. And this this is the skyline without the towers. And I was on a boat, and this was just struck, to this day, was struck by the fact that they're gone. They thought they were going to heaven was a refrain that was in the poem. So to lighten up the atmosphere, I thought I'd throw in some portraits and something that after 9/11, it was so hard to talk about this trauma that really not only hit the city, but you could say it hit the world. And so one way to talk is doing a portrait, which is a real collaboration. It's between the sitter and the painter or the drawer. And so this, by the way, is the banjo player who was on the cart trip. So 50 years later, he was visiting in New York. He's now England's most famous bluegrass banjo player. And he also makes banjos and minstrel banjos. So that was that time. Here's Charles and his son Felix, who now is going to college. So it was almost 8 years ago. And doing the portraits was actually therapy for myself as well, not only for the people who I was painting. We were able to really relate the day and our feelings and our thoughts and our politics. And I still feel that way doing portraits. It's a tremendous closeness with people. It's intimate. Just it's hard to get them to come back, of course, as we all know here. They are a longtime couple and friends from my daughter's college. I know them. I inherited her friends. And this is Grazia Della Terza, who's a dancer you'll see in some of the dance pictures. And Billy Kluver, who started experiments in art and technology, and that is something, he's a longtime friend of mine who's now passed away. He was really involved with 9/11 mentally, and it's posed several times. Experiments in art and technology, he started it. It was having artists work with engineers doing things that they never dreamt could actually be made, and it ended up with performances. And in the World's Fair of 1970, they were in Japan. This is a mother and son that later she said that the painting was prophetic, that it had to do with their relationship. But he too is going to college. I just thought these are straight oil paintings. They're modest in size. And I did eventually show them in '02 with, late '02 or '03 with like over 50 portraits. And so a lot of them were with a black gesso ground. And this was, you could see they just came once. It's Sam and Homero Oríges. He's a very great Mexican poet and writer, the prose writer. And this was the largest portraits that I had in the show of my 2 goddaughters. I'm their godfather. And it included a landscape, so I thought that you'd like to see a sample of something a little different. Here's close-ups of each of them, Sarah and Rebecca. And the black gesso was really, really interesting to work on because it was a little bit like the reverse painting on vinyl, the way it builds up These are done with oil crayons and oil paints. And I was really playing with the different varieties of black. Like you can get really cold blacks and really warm blacks. So that was extremely, it's not only the portrait, the storytelling, the collaboration of closeness, but the abstraction of it. It's like every part of a face or a person shows who they are. You know, if it's their ear or their shoulder or their eyes. And so I'm really into all of that in terms of making portraits. So this is the Bernstein family that on the beach, and I thought I'd show some watercolors. You see some other medium that in all these millions of years I've liked all the mediums. This is from Provincetown, where I mentioned before I've spent most of my summers, and where my father had gone, and that's how come I was there. And these are the dunes, and this is showing how a project develops from a gouache to a little metal maquette to a larger wooden piece. And this is about 30 by, I guess, 36 diameter, and it has a relief that's under a foot deep. So it has wood and a little aluminum. It's bending poplar, in case you're interested why how I got it that way. And it's painted with oils. This was another project for my many friends who died of AIDS, and this was the gouache. I called it The Hollow Men after T.S. Eliot's poem, and I had all of their names on it. This is the wooden structure before it was painted from the gouache, and then the painted version. So I thought here's the segue from Provincetown, summertime, to various projects, which I'm really going to zip fairly fast because, you know, time limit here. So this was a big deal project that was after Ruckus Manhattan. I was given the job to do all the original decorations for Big Apple Circus, thanks to a longtime friend whose brother is here today, Richard Levy, and Paul and Michael, who started the circus. And so you can see the trade towers on the side. It was on the beach before the World Financial Center was built. And it was down by Battery Park. And the clown was about 18 feet high that you walked through. It was in wood, and its costume was based on a no costume. And then the flats are 8 by 8 feet in reverse vinyl. These are the originators of Big Apple Circus. And they were on the tent for a few years. Then they became a lot, you know, more commercial, flicker, and these became kind of artifacts of the past. The Russian performers were friends of theirs from Moscow, and they met by chance on the street and said, "We're starting a circus, why don't you join us?" And they did. The borders are from Romanesque paintings, and I thought that this is Michael Motion, who is a very great juggler. He received a MacArthur Prize in juggling. Just to give you an example how great he was. The first performer I saw from Big Apple, and I said, "I'm definitely going to join your group." I too met them on the street. I met Richard and Paul on the street, and Paul said, "Well, are you a Carney person?" And I said, "Well, I'm first generation Carney." So he said, "How would you like to join our circus?" And here is the great Philippe Petit, who walked between the towers and was part of Big Apple, a great performer. He actually saved, for opening night, they couldn't quite get the tent completely up, and he climbed to the top, and he tied the knot so it was ready. He's a great hero. This was another project that was out on the beach, the same beach that's now the World Financial Center. This was the maquette for the community board, and then this was the pieces. They were, the female figure was about 14 feet high by 12 feet wide, and the male figure was 20 feet long. And they were made in gator board and painted with acrylics and urethane and tied down with parachute rope, 4 months outside. I got to sleep out there quite a bit. The whole show had maybe 12, it was a creative time show and art on the beach, and there were maybe 14 artists. I was the only figurative artist, so they stuck me over on the side. But I love this picture, so dramatic. There's the male figure. I don't know if you're familiar with this area of New York, but it certainly doesn't look like that. And this was also creative time. It was in the Customs House, which is now the Museum of the American Indian, and also by Battery Park. I was given a bank space. A wonderful painter called Louisa Chase, who's wearing the white pants. She had been in a robbery, and I said, oh God, I was given this bank space to do a show. And she said, well, I was just in a robbery. So I had different people pose during the show, and I did their portraits with pastels and paper and laminated onto cardboard with hot glue. And it was, there I am drawing it. It was a lot skinnier then. And actually, I thought that it was curious for you all to know, because a lot of you use pastels and charcoal, that how flexible a medium it is, because it was very immediate. And for 3 days the show was up without my drawing. That's Judd Tully, who's an art writer with the gun. Peter Hutton on the floor, great filmmaker. Got the gang. And there I am. This is the getaway car. I was living up Mulberry Street, and every day at 5 o'clock this guy would come with his great big Cadillac right near my house, and he'd stop in the middle of the street, and you'd hear, hey, Ma, and then you'd hear, yeah, and then she'd throw down the key so he could go see her. So he posed for me in the car. And I want to mention that where the person is walking on the left, if you walk into that room, it's a huge atrium with frescoes by Reginald Marsh about import-export, Lower Manhattan. And the American Indian Museum has kept those frescoes. You can see them. So another project was this memorial to American servicemen, and this was in a show called the Times Square Show, which some of you may have heard of. It was in 1980, and it was a seminal show. A lot of artists emerged at that time who were actually younger than myself. They had a war and death room, and these portraits are about 24 by 24 with low relief in stoneware ceramic with majolic glaze. I had a grant to do ceramics for a month. And there was a war and death room, so that's where that was. The whole show, with the 5 floors, was all anonymous, and it was in Times Square. I just, wanted you to see all different projects. There's the close-ups of the individual soldiers. And then this is homage to the old masters, which many of you are involved with. This was the women of Algiers of Delacroix. And I had some ambitious ideas, giant drawing. It was 12 feet high. I had to move in order to find a wall big enough. But then I did change it and developed it and had friends pose. And at that time I switched from acrylics to oil paints and wanted to do everything I knew at the time.